Well, hello and welcome to the webinar. My name is James Timmons. Today we're on part 3 for our very beginners using the EmbroideryStudio software. And today we're going to talk about the object properties menu inside the EmbroideryStudio software and kind of get acquainted with some of the options that we have here in order to make beautiful embroidery. First, I'm just going to just bring up some text here on the screen by right-clicking here, going in and typing in Wilcom lettering. And we've learned earlier that if we want to change our font, we can click here and we can choose our font that we want to use for this. As we choose our font for this, we can scroll down. We're going to work on the free line. I'm going to choose create text and I'm just going to left click on the screen here. Okay. So today I just wanted to share with you how to use the text inside the EmbroideryStudio software. And for one thing, when we talk about the object properties inside the software, they're basically just templates, if you will, editing capacity and being able to go in and change the settings in order to get a better result. And here with the text on the screen here, and I'm going to just kind of zoom in here a little bit further here so you can see this. So once you get the text on the screen, you'll need to go in and set up the properties for that. Now, one way that you can set up the properties, and there are several things that we're going to talk about here with this. We're going to talk about the fills. Okay, we're going to talk about the pull comp, and we're going to talk about the connectors. These are the main things here that we want to talk about with this, because these things are what's going to give us the right settings in order to create some beautiful embroidery. The first one here, we're going to go in to the fills. As I select the fills, now the stitch types that we're working with here, and we'll talk about the stitch types at a later session here also, but here's the satin stitch is what we're going to work with here using the Wilcom text. Okay, there are basically 3 types of stitches in the software that you'll be working with based on the size of the finished embroidery. Here's a satin stitch, here's a running stitch, and here's a tatami stitch. These are the 3 stitch types that we'll be working with today. We're looking at the satin stitches, and in our properties here, it's telling us here that this is a satin stitch or a column stitch. Okay, now here in the fills, we have the option to go in and do the stitch spacing or auto spacing. I'm going to zoom in. When we talk about auto spacing, this is the space between the stitches. Here, as far as our view is concerned, right now we're in True View. As I navigate over, this is your True View tab here. I'm going to turn this off by left clicking. And so this is what we have here now in the regular stitch view. Okay, now the stitch spacing is the space between each stitch. Okay, and if I were to go in and open up this stitch spacing here, let's say that I tried to stitch this out and it was too tight and it was kind of bulking up my fabric as it was stitching out, and I need to loosen this density, I would just go in and select that here, go to my fills, and here from my adjust, I can move this up here. The higher this number, okay, the less stitches will be in the object. Actually, it'll loosen it. Here's before, as it was tighter. Here is looser now here at 103% here. So the higher this number gets here, the looser those stitches get. Okay, but we have to be careful, because if I go back and turn on my True View, we don't want this look here where you have your underlay stitches showing on the fabric. Okay, so normally at 100 is a starting place. Now in your properties, I think yours may be defaulted to 90% like this, which is a little tighter. And what you need to do is once you stitch this out, you can determine, you know, is the stitch spacing enough for that particular project actually, because you want to make sure when you stitch it out that you're not seeing any fabric underneath these to make sure it's stitching out correctly. Okay. So at 90%, if I stitch it out and it's buckling up the fabric, if it's too tight, I have to loosen this density fill. Okay, I have to loosen it up. Okay, if this is too loose and I'm seeing fabric through, this means that I have to go in, and I usually use 80%. And so this is the density setting that I usually use here for this size and this width here also. Okay, now as we scroll down here, we're just going to talk about the auto split stitch here. Under the Fills tab, I'm going to select the object. And after I select that here, I can go in. Now here, with the auto split, you can't tell a difference here with it selected. If I take it off, you can't tell a difference whether it's on or off here. The length of the satin stitch here, the width of it, here, the default is at 7 millimeters. And what happens is, once you get a column stitch and it's too wide for regular stitching, and it forces your machine to slow down, the speed to slow down, you can go in and you could, in order to continue to use the satin stitch, you can do an auto split stitch. For this small size here, we're not going to need that auto split stitch. What's going to happen is, as the size gets larger, let's say that I have a size here on the jacket bag that's going to be 12 inches. Okay. Now here, I want you to look at the lower left side here. This is the stitch count currently now. I'm going to undo it. This is the stitch count at a smaller size here. Okay. As I increase the size of the design, okay, the stitch count is also going to increase as well. Now, using fonts like this in this particular scenario, now you have a, I'm going to give you a scenario of how wide a column should be before we have to change that stitch type to the next level. Okay, so normally, and I'm going to navigate here, I'm going to okay, and so I'm going to show you column widths here that are normal that we can use in our production actually. This one here, and the minimum width for a column here in order for it to stitch out on fabric is 1.2 millimeters. Okay, this is 1.2 millimeters. Okay, if I press my number 1 key for the one-to-one view, this is how wide 1.2 millimeters is. That's the minimum width for a column. Okay, I'm going to right click this here, and I'm going to make this wider, 4.0. 8.0. Okay. And we'll make this one 10.0. Well, let's make it, yes, 10.0. And we'll make this one 12.1. So as far as using the satin stitches inside your software, again, this, I'm going to show you a running stitch also. I might as well put this on here also. These are the stitch types here that we'll be working with in the Wacom software. Okay, and based on, everything is based on the size of the finished embroidery. The size of the finished embroidery is going to tell you what you can and what you cannot do It's going to tell you what type of stitch that you can use and what stitch that you can't use for this particular object that you're working with inside the software. Now, these are very important. Now, the difference between these and why these are important, and for you to understand how they work inside the software, here's your running stitch. Now, I'm going to right click this. I'm going to add it, put this first here. Your regular running stitch has a count of approximately 15 stitches per centimeter from point A to point B. 15 stitches per centimeter. You have some that are they're double stitches. Like if I click this, watch what happens here when I choose the backtrack. So this is a double stitch here, which is going to produce approximately 30 stitches per centimeter. Okay. Your smallest column stitch here is going to produce 50 stitches per centimeter. Okay. A thicker one is going to produce about the same, might go up about maybe 60. But here, it also, if it gets any larger than that, now it's going to be stitching approximately 70 to 120 stitches per square centimeter once it gets in between this and this here. Okay, between 70 and 120 stitches per centimeter. Now here with this one at 8, this is considered a long stitch. And you see here, as I zoom in, it's got a kind of a split in it like this. That's what this auto split stitch here is for. It's set to 7 millimeters though. Anything past 7 millimeters, it's going to do a split in order to reduce the possibility of a thread break or stitches that are too long for a satin stitch or a column stitch. Okay, if I click this off here, I can still stitch this straight across like this at 8 millimeters wide, which is now the stitch is getting really wide. Okay, and at this point here, this is now I can go, if I make this, I've done some 10 millimeters wide. Rarely, but here, I can go 10 millimeters wide. This one here at 12.1, this is the maximum width for normal, for most embroidery machines. The stitch length, the maximum is 12.1 millimeters wide. This is the maximum. And this means that at this point, if I try to do a satin stitch longer than 12.1, only the Barrett machines do a 12.7. So if I try to do a satin stitch without using the auto split stitch like this, longer than 12.1, this is what's going to happen. Okay, this is 10 millimeters. This is beyond, or this is right at, or this is too wide for me to try to use a regular satin stitch with this. Okay, and see what you see here also, and look at the types of lines that are on the screen now. This is solid lines. This means your embroidery machine is still stitching at regular speed. Okay, even though it's a long stitch. This, when you see the dotted lines, these are jump stitches. This is when your machine is going ka-choo, ka-choo, ka-choo. It's going from straight across because this stitch is too wide for a regular satin stitch. Okay, I'm going to go back. I'm going to click on my true view here. Now, I can't see that here from looking at the true view, but just knowing that 12.1 is a maximum stitch length. So at this point now, I can no longer, unless I'm going to use the auto split stitch here, I can no longer, in some instances, or a lot of instances, you don't want to use the auto split stitch at this point. It's too wide for a column stitch, so what do I need to do? At this point here, it has to be done, as I select this here, it has to be done as a tatami stitch. Okay, and so, so right click here and choose convert. I'm going to break this apart first. And now I'm going to choose convert. I'm going to change this into a tatami stitch here. Now, and this is what it looks like now. Because I can't make a satin stitch this wide without using the split for the auto split. Now I have to change this stitch type here to, I have to upgrade it here to a tatami stitch. And this stitch is 200 stitches per square centimeter. So I only use this stitch when I absolutely have to. Okay, only when I absolutely have to. And this means that the more stitches that it generates is going to increase your production time also. So you want to use this stitch type here as less as possible. If it's large enough, you don't have a choice. You have to use it. If the design and the objects are large enough, you have to use this stitch, and that's what this stitch is designed for: large fill areas. Okay, and by showing you this now, so right now, so I'm fine as far as I don't have to use the auto split stitch with this. It's going to change though if I increase the size of this, or I go in and I change the font. Let's say right now, if I choose a different font, okay, and again, as large as this gets, as long as you see the visual here of how wide the stitch can be in order for me to use a satin stitch, you're fine. Because here, this is in between these two, so it's still safe to use a satin stitch for this. Okay, and so as you're working inside the software, just know that be mindful of the widths that you're using, because it could cause some problems in production, and we don't want to stop production or cause a hiccup in production because we missed something here. Okay, now so the fills, you select the object here. Under your fills, you go in and you could adjust the auto spacing, and you could adjust or add the auto split stitch if that column gets really, really, really wide. Okay, and that's pretty much what we'll use the fills menu here for inside the object properties. Okay. I'm going to undo this here to take it back. The next tool I'm going to talk about, the next Docker here, I want to talk about is the pull comp settings here. The pull comp is a Docker basically that allows you to adjust the pull compensation of a design or your text here on the screen, and you can add a column width to increase the column width of the design. And here with this, as I select this on my screen here, right now the pull compensation, the default here is 0.17 on my screen here basically. Pull compensation and column width are two totally different things. They're not the same at all. So you can't use pull compensation to make a column wider. It's only for the pull and stretch on the fabric once it's stitching in production. That's what the pull compensation for. And usually if I were to increase mine, I usually never go above 0.2. Okay. Again, this is for the stretch and pull on the fabric. Okay. If I want to make this bolder, I can choose column width here, and I can adjust the column width. I'll start with 0.5 or 0.5 or 0.05 to 10 to 15. I can go all the way up like this. It's going to make the columns bolder by me using the column width if I want to increase the width of a column. So you'll always use the column width to do this with here actually. Okay. Very important to understand the difference between the column width and the pull compensation. I can even take this negative like this. Okay. So you have that much control pretty much on your lettering and increasing the size of it and improving the thickness of it, especially if you're going to stitch something on a cap. Okay. And that's what that does inside the software. It helps you thicken up the columns. Okay. This is a great tool here, again, because lots of times when you need to go in and increase the width of a column, basically, you want to be able to do it in a simple way here. Here, just by going in, right-clicking on this, going to your object properties and choosing pull comp. Okay. One major difference between these two items here is this. Let me show you here. And I'll just grab this one. I'm going to right-click over here and move this over there. And I'm going to right-click this again to do a quick clone of it. It's like this. I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to take off the true view. Now, for these, I want to go in, I want to change the underlay here. talk about this in a few minutes here. And I just want to use the edge run underlay stitch for this. So now, to show you the difference between the pull comp and the column width, if I were to select this item here and go to my pull comp and thinking that the pull compensation is going to make the columns wider, if I increase this, I'll make this 100, 1.0. I'm going to undo this and I'm going to redo it. I want you to see what's happening here. Pay close attention to what's happening and what's not happening. Okay, so the pull comp here, it went out, and because it's based on the pull and stretch on the fabric, like for the difference between stitching on canvas and stitching on a towel, basically, this overstitches the object. Basically, it overstitches it. If it were going on towel material, it needs to overstitch in order for you to have a column that's wide enough and that can be seeable on the actual fabric. So that's what the pull comp does here. Actually, again, is for the pull and stretch on the fabric as it overstitches. Now we're going to do the same thing to this one, but this time we're going to choose the column width, and I'm going to also make this 1.0. I'm going to press enter. Now you see this. Okay, so you see the difference. On just for the pull compensation, it pushed them out, but it didn't. The underlay stitch didn't move. So on this object here, if I were to stitch this on fabric on a towel, it's going to do something like this. It's going to look just like this. Why? Because it has no protection on the borders here. Here, the borders go directly out where they should be, protecting the border here for a nice, smooth, crisp edge. But here it didn't do it. So whenever you want to increase the width of a column, you're always going to use the column width. Okay? All right. So the next thing we're going to do here is, by taking off the true view here, we're being seen some objects here on the screen. I'm going to also press S, or I'm going to navigate here to the show stitches. And when you look at these letters here, you see a little 0 here, and you also see a triangle. The 0 is going to always represent the beginning, the starting point where the machine starts to stitch, and it's going to add a lock stitch here to lock it in. That's where the 0 is here. It's going to start stitching here. It's going to go through all of this, all of these segments here, and here is a stop with a triangle. The triangle will always be defined by a trim or a color change as it goes to the next object, which does what we call a tie-in stitch, and at the end here with the triangle, a tie-off stitch to lock. It has to lock it in and lock it at the end, at the beginning and the end, in order to keep these stitches from unraveling. Okay, and this is what they look like here without the stitches shown on the screen like this. Okay, I'm going to press S here again. Now what we can see here also, you can see the dotted lines here. And again, these represent trims because this is the same color. And you'll also see these on color changes as well. Okay, you'll see this dotted line. So now, how do we go in and how do we fix, I'm going to select the true view here again. So if we want to go in and we want to, let's say that we have this lettering on the screen, and we wanted to go in and we wanted to close the sections up here, or we wanted to go in and add connections or take away connections. And let's say right now with this, I'm going to go into my effects here. Right now, with the true view showing, you don't see any connection stitches here underneath. You only see them when you take off the true view with the trims here. But with the true view turned on, here, whenever there's, whatever you see here on the screen with the true view is going to stitch out the same way. So you're not going to have any, so there are trims going on between these letters here because there are no connection stitches joining them. If I were to right click this and do a quick clone of it here. And if I were to change the size of this, let's say I wanted to make this 3.4. Oops, I must change my metric system here first, guys. I want to make this 4 inches wide. Okay, this is 4 inches wide. Okay, at 4 inches wide, what do we see? We see connection stitches on the letters here. Okay, and at this size here, it may be necessary to use the connection stitches because the letters are very close together this time. They're not spread out like you see here on the much larger design. Okay, and so anything that's going to be this small here at 4 inches, the connection stitches, they may be good to leave these in here. As I take off the true view, as you can see here, the only trim that you see is between the M and the L here. Okay, and that's what it looks like here, again, with the text a lot smaller. Okay, I'll click up back on my true view here. Now, if I were to go in and space these letters out, go here, go to my specials tab here, and I increase the letter spacing. Just a little bit to 13. On some of these areas I have trims because there are no connection stitches here. And some of them I have connection stitches because they're closer together like this. If you ever want to go in and control when a machine trims or when a machine continues to run, the place that you're going to do that here will be your connectors tab. Okay. This is your connectors tab. And right now here it is the place where we go in and we tell the sewing machine when to trim or when to jump to continue running. Okay, and because we have Wilcom letters here, how do we know? Because if we look at our color object list, it's showing the letter A here for Wilcom text. That's what this is here. Now I want to go in now and I want to tell the machine what to do. Now I may have a customer that's very picky and does not like these connection stitches here. So this means that I'm going to have to go in and I'm going to have to take them out here to do a trim. Now with this selected, because I'm using a Wilcom font here, I have to navigate up top here to my drop arrow and choose Inside Object. This is what you'll always use when you're using a Wilcom font. Okay, because you have the text on a text string here. And if you click one, you select everything. And so once I choose Inside the Object, now it's up to me to tell the machine when to do a trim and when not to do a trim. Right now, once I've set this, I'll go to trim after. And right now the settings here are, for the trim after are, if the next connector after the L, after the E, after the T, after the T, after the E, if that is greater than 2 millimeters, it's going to do a trim. Okay, so the space between each area here, I'm telling the embroidery machine, if that space is longer than 2.0 millimeters wide, I want to do a trim. So we can tell now that this area here is not 2 millimeters wide, it's much less. Okay, so what could I do to add trims between these characters here with this? Of course, I'll have to make this number smaller. So if I make this number 1.0 millimeters and press enter, you see this is before, this is after. So now the machine knows that if there's any spaces in between any characters that are greater than 1 millimeter, it's going to do a trim. Okay, and as it goes in, it's going to do its tie-in stitch at the end here. Here's your tie-off stitch at the end here, actually. Okay, this is at the end of the design. And you have to have those in order for the stitching to remain inside the fabric locked so it does not unravel. Okay, and that's what the trim after does. So whenever you have Wilcom text that you're looking at here, you're trying to work on the connectors, trying to get the machine to trim, this is what you'll use the inside object with those. Any other objects, you'll be able to use the after object. Okay, As we scroll down further here, in the connectors tab, here are tie-in stitches here. And I showed you earlier that the tie-in stitches here are going to, this little circles here are tie-in stitches. You press start on your machine, the needle goes in, it goes, it does 2 short stitches, then the machine speeds up. It locks it at the beginning, and at the end, when it finishes it, it goes, it locks those at the end also. We have to have these in there, okay, or the stitches will unravel, and it's not a pretty sight. Okay, so at this point here with the tie-in stitches, what my settings are, I have them set to after trim or color change. That's what the CC here is for, color change. At the previous connector before it is greater than 2 millimeters, I'm going to do a tie-in stitch. Okay, and so it's going to tie in, and it's going to continue to run to the end. And with this, the length of the stitch is 1 millimeter. The number of stitches for the tie-in stitches are 2 stitches. Okay. Now let's take a look at the tie-off stitches at the end. Here are my settings. I want a tie-off stitch before a trim or color change. Always tie off last at the end. If the next connector is 2.0, I want a tie-off stitch there. And for my method here of stitching, I'm going to choose the center method here for my lock stitch because it does a running stitch. Okay, and it's thinner, and it's you don't see it as much as you would see this little X here that stitches on, especially with the small letters. Okay, so I'll use this method here with this, allowing it to do just a center. Here's my length for this stitch. Here's at 0.5. I can make this 1.0 here also as the other one. It's just a smaller, if it's at 0.5, it's a little smaller stitch. Okay, and so I'm going to leave that there for the settings. I'm going to press T again. Now, and if I want to go in, if I want to save this permanently, if I want to save these settings here that I just went in here and did, if I want to save those permanently, I can click Save here. And I can change my default settings here. If I want to use these continually, I can change them for the default here and just click OK to confirm that, and just click OK here. And it will save these settings here permanently to my workspace. All right. And I can use those again. So this, in a nutshell, is the connectors tab here. And I explained to you what it does. We'll get more into detail with this a little bit later. But I just wanted to give you just a brief description of what this does for us in improving the quality of our stitching. Okay. Here, I'm going to zoom in. Now, the next tool we're going to talk about here is the underlay. The underlay, of course, allows you to put underlay stitches underneath our objects. Okay, I'm going to click on the True View here, take it off. Now, when you have stitches that are this small, any small lettering at all, you never want to use by shape. This is designed for large fill areas, like for big jacket backs and things like that, or something very large. We want to always do by segment when we're talking about lettering, because each letter, as I press S here, some of them have 3 segments. Here's 1 segment here, here's 2, here's 3. The E only has 1. The R has 1, 2, 3. And you want to do these by segment. Okay? And so also for something this thin here also, you're always going to use a center run stitch for that also. Okay? In the center run underlay stitch, I've got my length here set to 2 millimeters. Okay? And so as I scroll down, somehow there's a secondary underlay stitch here selected. I'm going to deselect this. I don't need this. It takes away that zigzag. And for something that's this small, this is appropriate here, here for that. And so that's how you go in and change the underlay stitch for something like this. Now, sometimes when you go in and you are working with different fabric types and things like that, if you go in, something comes up looking like this, you can select this. Up top here, you can take away the cap corners here. You can deselect these items here. and they will improve the stitching quality of very small lettering. And this is what I use. I just uncheck these, and it improves the quality of those. And that's how you would go in and do that. Now, our next one up top here is a little bit larger. And for something like this, I need more underlay stitches. For this, I have an edge run underlay stitch here and a zigzag. So this is appropriate here for this size here that's going to stitch on a jacket back here. Okay, and so this much larger, and therefore I need more underlay stitches on it to secure the border and the inside of the fill as it goes in, stitching on top of the garment. Okay, and that is a view pretty much of what the underlay stitches do. Okay, and so we're gonna leave this right here. We're gonna end this, and so we'll move on to the next one. Now, I want to let you know also that as we can continue with this, with our next series of videos here, you know, again, this is designed for beginners, very beginners, someone very new to the software, and very important. Now, what I want to share, one last thing I want to share with you here with this white crosshair here is an indication of the center of the hoop. It's in the wrong location here, because if I were to select this here like this should be in the center for the hoop in order for the next run on the embroidery machine. So in order to move this back to the center of this, there are some things you can do. You can navigate to this icon here where it says auto starting in. If you click it once or twice, sometimes it'll go back to the center of the design. If you double click it here, if you right click on it, you want to make sure that the apply auto starting in is on. The maintain automatically is selected here. Okay, this is the hoop here, and this is the center of the hoop, and this is where the white crosshair should always be, unless you change it to a different position. Okay, and make sure that this is saved. Want to make sure that that's saved, and so click OK here. So that white crosshair needs to go back to the center of the design. Okay. Whenever you go in, whenever you do lettering, anything that you do, before you save it out to your flash stick or send it to the machine, you want to run a stitch player. This is your stitch player. Or you can press Shift R. Once I left click this, the player goes in. I can increase the speed of this or take it down. And so with this, notice here also that this is doing a zigzag stitch, so I'm going to stop this right away. And just checking here, so this should be a zigzag here for this because it is larger. Okay, I'll go back here to my stitch player. So as I go, I'll speed this up here also. And depending on if this is going on very thick fabric here, and therefore the edge run and the zigzag is sufficient for something that's this size here actually. And once it stitches this out, I'm going to slow the speed down here on the stitch player. This is a very, very important tool inside your software. And I'm just going to bring this back here. And when it stitches a smaller text, you'll see how it stitches that smaller text with the correct underlay stitches. I'm just going to drag this over here. I'm going to move this, going to speed this up a little bit. And here, the stitch player is going to show you exactly how this is going to stitch out. If there are any problems, you know, you should be able to go to the stop the stitch player and go make the necessary changes right away. And this is going to show you what is going to stitch on the machine and how it's going to stitch on the machine. So this is crucial. Before you save this, yeah, you should run this every time. It doesn't matter how long you've been doing it. You just want to run it to see and make sure that everything is going to stitch in the correct order and with the right underlay stitches and things of that nature as well. It goes back to the center here. And so now I'm going to click stop here. And that's the last thing that you want to do before you save your design to your USB, you know, your floppy, or send it out to your machine. And this is going to do it for this session. I do thank you for joining me today. I hope you learned something. I look forward to seeing you for the next session. Thank you so much for your time, and as always, happy digitizing.